Welcome to another video. Doria, who was a handmaiden to Daenerys Targaryen, mentioned Irogenia in Game of Thrones Season 1. According to her, she was the most beautiful woman in the known world, but her story was not fully told until today. Kindly like and subscribe to this channel for more. Irogenia was born in the year of the long summer's end, to a low-born house on the waterfront of Lys that smelled of brine and rotting nets. Her mother was a fish curer's daughter who had caught the eye of a Valyrian blooded merchant passing through the salt quarter. A man with silver hair and violet eyes, who paid for 2 nights and left before the 3rd morning. He left behind a handful of copper coins and, as it turned out, a great deal more. A seed. The girl came into the world screaming and silver-haired herself, with eyes the color of deep water. Not the pale lavender of Old Valyrian stock, but a true sea green that could shift to gray in certain light. Her mother named her Irogenia, for an ancestor she claimed had once danced before the Dragon Lords, though no one in the Salt Quarter believed a word of it. The Salt Quarter was not a place for beauty. The fishwives were broad and sunburnt, their hands thick with callus and scales. Irogenia grew up among them, hauling nets and salting fish, and learning the commerce of poverty. But even as a child, she was wrong for the work. Too fine-boned, too still, with a quality of attention about her that made grown men uncomfortable. She had a way of looking at a person that made them feel she was the only one in the world who truly saw them, and also the only one who could see through them entirely. She was 9 years old when Magisters of the House of the Flowering Reed came to the Salt Quarter. Magisters was not what Irogenia had expected. She had imagined the mistresses of the pleasure houses as painted creatures, gaudy and loud. Magisters was simply dressed, with gray in her dark hair and the bearing of a woman who had never once in her life wondered whether she deserved to enter a room. She walked through the Salt Quarter as if she owned the cobblestones, and she stopped when she saw Irogenia sitting on a dock, mending a net, staring out at the harbor with that uncanny stillness. Magisters purchased the girl's contract from her mother for 3 gold dragons and a bolt of Myrish lace, a fortune in the Salt Quarter. Irogenia's mother wept, but whether from grief or gratitude, the girl was never certain. The House of the Flowering Reed was the 3rd finest pleasure house in Lys, a distinction that still placed it above any such establishment in any other city in the known world. It occupied an entire block near the perfumed garden, its walls draped in jasmine and climbing roses, its rooms furnished in silk and polished teak. 47 bed slaves and courtesans worked within its walls, ranging from girls barely past childhood to a legendary woman of 60 who received only the very wealthiest of clients and charged accordingly. Irogenia was given to a woman called Thessaly, who was the house's teacher of what she termed the deeper arts. Any fool can be beautiful, Thessaly told her on the first morning. Beauty is common as weeds. What we teach here is rarer. We teach attention. The training was rigorous and strange. For the first 2 years, Irogenia learned nothing of the carnal arts at all. She learned instead how to listen. Truly listen. Not merely to the words a man spoke, but to the pauses between them. The shift of his shoulders, the direction his eyes moved when he believed he was unobserved. She learned the dialects of 6 cities and the court protocols of 4 great houses. She learned music, not merely to play, but to understand what a man's choice of song revealed about his longing. She learned the names of 300 wines and could identify them blindfolded by scent alone. She learned, above all, how to be present. Men spend their whole lives, Thessaly explained, surrounded by people who are thinking of something else. Their wives think of their children. Their children think of their inheritance. Their servants think of their wages. When you are with a man, he must feel that you are thinking only of him, not because he's interesting. Most of them are not, but because you have chosen to be interested. That is the gift. That is what they pay for. By the time Irogenia was permitted to receive her first client at the age of 13, she had studied as thoroughly as any maester, though in rather different disciplines. The first client was a Pentoshi Magister named Valeris, a paunchy, sweating man of 50 who had made his fortune in the slave trade and spent it in the pleasure houses of every city from Bravos to Volantis. He arrived expecting a pretty child and left 2 days later having spoken more honestly about himself than he had in 30 years of marriage. He did not precisely understand what had happened. He only knew that he tipped extravagantly and requested her by name the next time he passed through Lys. The word spread quickly, as such things do in the free cities. In her 15th year, Irogenia met the woman who would become the great love of her life. Her name was Sylvain, and she was not a client. She was a junior acolyte of the Red Temple of R'hllor, sent to negotiate a contract for the festival of the Lord of Light, and the pleasure houses of Lys, who often provided entertainment for religious observances, a fact that scandalized visitors from the Seven Kingdoms and confused no one local. Sylvain was Irogenia's age, dark-haired and sharp-tongued, and possessed a faith in her fire god that struck Irogenia as both foolish and magnificent. They became inseparable. Sylvain came to the house of the flowering reed in her off hours, and Irogenia slipped out on her free afternoons to sit in the shadow of the Red Temple, watching Sylvain tend to the sacred fires. They argued about everything: the nature of gods, the ethics of the trade, the proper way to cook river fish, a question of whether the world was ruled by chance or by some invisible design. Sylvain believed absolutely in R'hllor's plan. Irogenia believed absolutely in nothing, which Sylvain said was the same as believing in the darkness. "You have fire in you," Sylvain told her once. "I can see it. You keep it hidden." "I keep everything hidden," Irogenia replied. "It's what I'm trained for." "No. With the clients, you perform warmth. With me, it's different. You actually burn." This was true, and Irogenia resented how accurately the acolytes saw her. The friendship lasted 6 years. It ended when Sylvain was selected to journey to Ashai with a delegation of red priests, a posting so distant and so final that it was effectively a kind of death. They parted at the harbor without ceremony. Irogenia did not weep until the ship had passed entirely from sight, and then she wept for 3 hours, alone, in a manner she allowed no one to see. She was never again in her long life that unguarded with another person. By her 20th year, Irogenia had outgrown the House of the Flowering Reed. This was not ingratitude. She retained a genuine affection for old Maresia until the woman's death, and endowed a bed in the Lys Healer's Hall in her name. But the house could not contain her. She had become the sort of person for whom institutions are too small. She purchased her own contract from Maresia for 50 gold dragons, a sum she had saved over 7 years through careful management of her own gifts, and established herself in a house on the Street of Silver Lanterns, a narrow building with a walled garden and 6 rooms, each furnished in the manner of a different city. She did not advertise. She did not need to, yet the clients came. They came first because of her reputation, which was already remarkable. They returned because of something no reputation could quite capture: the sense, which every man who visited her reported, that she had understood something about him that no one else had ever troubled to see. A shipping magnate from Volantis wept in her garden, and afterward could not quite say why. A sellsword captain from the disputed lands described his dead son to her for 4 hours, and left feeling that the boy had in some sense been memorialized. A young Westerosi lord, newly arrived in the free cities and furiously homesick, found himself telling her about the smell of the forests at Casterly Rock, and she listened with such complete attention that by the time he left, he was no longer homesick at all. Or perhaps he simply felt that there was one person in Essos who knew what he missed. She was not merely skilled. She was, in some way, that her clients struggled to articulate to their friends and their wives and their confessors, good, meaning not virtuous precisely, but genuine, in a life built on performance. The performance was always there, the artistry, the calculation, but underneath it was a real interest in the humans who came to her, which was rarer than any technique. Her prices climbed. Her waiting list grew. She turned away more clients than she accepted. The marriage proposals began in her 24th year and did not end until her death. The first was a Lycene magister named Theron, who was handsome, rich, and so accustomed to getting what he wanted that the concept of refusal had become theoretical for him. He proposed marriage after his third visit, citing love, which Irogenia doubted, and devotion, which she doubted more. She refused him pleasantly in terms that left him no clear angle of objection, and he departed confused and returned 2 months later and proposed again. She refused him again. He tried 7 times in 4 years before finally marrying a Pentoshi merchant's daughter. He sent Irogenia a wedding gift, a bolt of extraordinarily expensive courtesan silk. And she sent him a card that said only, "Be happy," which he kept for the rest of his life, and could never quite explain to his wife. The proposals that followed ranged from the sincere to the absurd. A Bravose water dancer offered to give up his craft. A Giscari slave lord offered to free every slave he owned, an offer she found both touching and inherently self-congratulatory. A Dothraki Khal, newly arrived in the coastal lands with his Khalasar, and still uncertain of the customs of settled folk, sent 17 horses as a bride price, which she accepted graciously and immediately donated to the city's poorest stables. A king. She never disclosed which one. Came by private galley and stayed a week. He offered her a seat at his council and legitimacy for any children they might have, and a palace on a hill overlooking a sea she had never seen. She was tempted more by this than by any other offer, not because of the palace, but because of the sea she had never seen, and the possibility that somewhere beyond the edge of her known world, there were people she had not yet understood. But she declined. She had thought carefully about this question, the question of why she declined. Because she was not a woman who acted without understanding her own reasons. She had concluded the following: that to be a wife was to become a mirror. Not because marriage was inherently diminishing, but because the men who proposed to her did not want Irogenia. They wanted the feeling she gave them of being fully seen, and they wanted it permanently, exclusively, locked into a contract. They wanted to own the light that fell on them when they were with her, and the light, she had decided, was not for owning. She was perhaps 30 when she wrote this down. In a small book she kept locked in a cedar chest, she wrote, "What they love is not me, but the attention I give them. Attention cannot be promised. It can only be offered. A promise of attention is already inattention." She showed this to no one. She was not certain it was entirely true. She kept it anyway. The legend of the eyes came from a very specific incident, though the incident itself has been so mythologized that the original event is nearly unrecoverable. What is known is this: that in her 31st year, Irogenia attended a merchants' gathering in the hall of the Magisters, as the guest of a Lycene nobleman. A social occasion, not a professional one, though the distinction was not always honored by those present. Also in attendance was a man from Yiti, a diplomat of some sort, who had spent 18 months in Lys negotiating trade arrangements, and who had reportedly rejected every pleasure house in the city, a fact that had become a source of civic embarrassment to the Magisters. She did not cross the room, she did not speak to him. She looked at him for approximately 30 seconds by the account of witnesses, with the full weight of her attention, and then she looked away. They spoke for 2 hours. He did not visit her house. That is, perhaps, the most interesting part of the story. They simply spoke at the gathering, and then he returned to Yiti, and she returned to her life, and nothing further occurred between them, as far as anyone could determine. But he wrote about her in a letter to his brother that was later copied and circulated among the trade houses, and the phrase that was preserved was this: she could finish a man with nothing but her eyes. In her later years, Irogenia took on students of her own. She was not formally associated with any pleasure house. The girls came to her on their own initiative, or were sent by parents who understood that what she taught was not merely a trade skill, but something harder to name. She charged nothing for the teaching, which surprised people, until they understood that she found it genuinely interesting, which surprised them more. She taught what Thessaly had taught her, and she taught other things Thessaly had not known. She taught that a person in any negotiation, a merchant, a diplomat, a lover, a wife, must understand not only what is being offered, but what is being feared. She taught that the most powerful position in any room is the one you take by appearing to want nothing. She taught that there is a kind of freedom in understanding that you cannot be completed by another person, that you are already entire, that what you offer another human being is your attention and not your wholeness. Several of her students became famous in their own right, in Lys and beyond. One became the mistress of a Westerosi lord and is alleged to have influenced his politics significantly. One became the proprietress of the most successful pleasure house in Bravos. One left the trade entirely and became a merchant in spices, and died rich and unremarkably contented. Irogenia died in her 59th year of a fever that came on quickly and permitted her little time, though she had made the necessary arrangements. Her house on the Street of Silver Lanterns went to a collective of her former students. Her cedar chest went to the House of the Flowering Reed, which was still in operation under new management, with instructions that the book inside was to be copied and given to any girl who asked for it, and to no one else. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Bye.